Hi, everybody. So I'll to get the ebook on Amazon. So I'm going to be releasing it available for free tomorrow. I'm going to be making another announcement. It will be available for free for anyone who was not able to download it, but you're only going to be able to get it for I did make it available before, and a lot of people did not get the notification. So if you don't get to download it today, I'm not like I don't know what to tell you. I can only release it for free for 5 days. So I'm going to make another announcement. If you please try to download it now. A lot of people disliked my previous, like one of my live streams where I said it was going to be available for free. I did make it available for free, but if you miss the 2 days that it was available for free, that's not my like. I didn't say I didn't lie. I didn't say that it like I kept my promise. It is going to be available for free, but you actually have to download it. You can't um you have a time frame to actually download it. So I mean you don't have to read it right now, but you have to at least click on it and then accept the download, and then you can read it later. So I'm actually going to read uh excerpt from my book, chapter 2, because this is my solution to the non-entity problem when it comes to antinatalism. A lot of people have claimed that they have debunked antinatalism because, well, most of their arguments basically center around the fact that a person can be harmed by being brought into existence because they would have to exist first in order to be harmed. Um, I think they already know what the argument is. They're just trying to find some hole in the argument so that they can negate any responsibility. The bottom line is that you did create a human being who's going to suffer. So to try to use these technical maneuvers to get around it is really, um, it just really shows accountability for the godlike authority that you're actually exercising. Um, these people are being very disingenuous, and I basically already explained in that live stream about Nietzsche that all of these logical fallacies, all of these justifications for procreation are based on logical fallacies. Um, I'm aware that a lot of people are not going to be in this live stream because a lot of people are on finding notes at his channel. So I don't know when would be a better time. I already made the announcement, so I'm just going to have to go through with this live stream. For those who missed it, you can just catch it later. So here's chapter 2. Um, Now, chapter 1 established the disposal rights test, which established that we don't own our life, because I talked about the bundle of rights that incidents of ownership include disposal rights, which is the primary test of ownership. Um, and it is impossible to own something without having disposal rights. And so if we don't own it, then by implication, that means that the state owns it because the state is exercising superior disposal rights. The state does have the authority to terminate someone's life or to prevent that person's life from being disposed of. So now we're going to get into chapter 2. Because, yes, I'm arguing that we are enslaved, that we are owned. I haven't really established that. Chapter 1 didn't really establish that we're a slave. It just established that we don't own our lives. That is established more so in chapter 6. But let's get into the impossibility of consent, because this is going to be my solution to the non-entity problem. So before you existed, you could not consent to exist. This is logically necessary. Consent requires a material person capable of understanding. And the reason why I wrote the word a material person, because a lot of people, that whole soul contract mythology, that your soul consented to being brought into existence. No, it requires a material person, a person who is in human form, not a soul, to actually consent to being brought into existence, which is impossible. Um, a material person capable of understanding, evaluating, and agreeing to what is proposed before being brought into existence. No such person existed. Your parents could not obtain your consent because you were not there to give it. Some might argue that this impossibility eliminates any consent requirement. If obtaining consent is impossible, perhaps consent is not required. This argument fails. The impossibility of obtaining consent does not make a non consensual imposition morally permissible. It makes the imposition problematic precisely because consent cannot be obtained. Con- Consider a counterfactual analogy. Suppose I could create a person by pressing a button, and this person would immediately be subjected to various conditions I determine: their genetic makeup, their family circumstances, their place in society, the challenges they will face. The fact that I cannot obtain this person's consent before creating them does not make it permissible for me to press the button. The impossibility of consent is precisely what makes the act morally problematic. I am proposing conditions on someone who cannot agree to those conditions. The same principle applies to procreation. Your parents pressed a button. They set your life into motion and subjected you to all the conditions of existence. A body that requires constant maintenance, psychological vulnerabilities, inevitable suffering, the necessity of participating in economic and social systems, and ultimately mortality. You bear all these conditions without having consented to any of them. The fact that your consent was impossible to obtain does not eliminate the problem. It is the problem. Kant himself recognized this. The act of procreation brings a person into the world without his consent and on our own initiative, for which deed the parents incur an obligation to make the child content with his condition so far as they can. Even one of Western philosophy's most influential moral theorists acknowledged that procreation is fundamentally non consensual and that this non consensual imposition creates parental obligations. Some might argue that existence cannot be a harm because non existence provides no basis for comparison. You cannot be harmed by being brought into existence because, had you not been brought into existence, there would be no you to be harmed. The argument confuses the timing of harm with the reality of harm. The harm is not that you were brought into existence from non existence into existence. The harm is that you now exist without having consented to exist, and existence imposes comprehensive costs that you must bear now. The costs are real, measurable, and unavoidable. The fact that you could not have been harmed in an alternative scenario where you did not exist does not mean you are not harmed in the actual scenario where you exist currently and bear costs without having consented to bear any of them. Furthermore, the no harm argument proves too much. By this logic, creating a person in terrible circumstances would not be harmful as long as non existence provides no basis for comparison. But clearly, we recognize that putting people into predictable, terrible circumstances is harmful. We realize that some lives involve so much suffering that bringing such lives into existence is inherently detrimental. If we can recognize harm in extreme cases, we can recognize potential harm in all cases. The question is not whether existence has the potential to be harmful. Clearly, it can be. The question is whether existence without consent is inherently problematic, even when existence involves more pleasure than pain. The answer is yes, because the costs are comprehensive, consent is absent, and the benefits accrue primarily to those who existence is, excuse me, those who impose existence rather than to the person whose existence is imposed. Some parents claim that their children have retroactively consented to existence by continuing to live. If they really objected to existence, they argue, they would just kill themselves. I also address this in chapter 1. They argue that the fact that their children continue living proves that they have accepted the arrangement and therefore consented to it. This argument fails for multiple reasons. First, continuing to live is not consent. It is behavior undertaken in the context of constrained choices. People continue living because suicide is difficult, painful, uncertain, and traumatizing. People continue living because the state prohibits medically assisted death. People continue living because psychological and biological drives towards survival make ending their existence difficult, even when their existence is undesired. Continuing to live under these constraints is not consent in any meaningful sense. It is making the best of a situation one never agreed to in the first place. Critically, not wanting to exist is fundamentally different from wanting to die. Even those who ultimately commit suicide don't necessarily want to die. We are all predisposed to fear our own annihilation. What they actually wanted was to never have existed in the first place. Death becomes merely the best option among worse options, a terrible solution to a problem they never consented to face. The distinction reveals while treating continued existence as consent is profoundly cruel, those who don't want to exist are trapped between two involuntary conditions imposed by birth: enduring an unwanted existence or confronting an inevitable, frightening, traumatic death. Neither option represents consent to the original imposition. Both impose the burden of existence and the inevitability of death. Choosing between them is not consent, but merely deciding how to navigate an unchosen predicament. Second, even if we treated one's continued existence as consent, such consent would be coerced. Consent is meaningful only when it is freely given with genuine alternatives available. When a person's only alternative to a continued existence consists of violent, uncertain, and traumatizing methods of death, their decision to continue living is not free consent. It is choosing the least bad among cruel alternatives. This is the essence of coercion, being forced to accept an erasement because the only escape requires self destruction. Third, the burden of obtaining consent lies with the person imposing the condition, not with the person on whom it is imposed. Parents bore the responsibility to obtain your consent before imposing existence. They could not get that consent, which made the imposition problematic from the outset. They cannot now shift this burden on to those who they have created by claiming they have retroactively consented simply because they have not killed themselves. The obligation to secure consent cannot be transferred retroactively to the victim of a non consensual imposition. Fourth, retroactive consent is conceptually incoherent when applied to foundational arrangements. One cannot retroactively consent to the basic conditions that make consent possible in the first place. If existence itself were imposed without consent, one cannot later consent to that imposition because their ability to consent depends on the very thing that was imposed without consent. Consent presupposes existence. Existence cannot therefore be consented to after the fact. Therefore, the authority to procreate is necessarily illegitimate. Parents impose existence on to their children without any possibility of consent. This non-consensual imposition is the foundation for the moral debt for life enslavement. When analyzing any transaction or arrangement, we must ask who benefits, who pays. In the case of procreation, the asymmetry is stark and undeniable. Parents receive comprehensive benefits while children bear comprehensive costs. You bear every cost associated with existence. These costs are comprehensive, unavoidable, and imposed on you without your consent. Maintaining a body. You must feed, clothe, shelter, and maintain your body continuously throughout your existence. This maintenance requires constant resource expenditure. You must obtain food, which involves money, which in turn requires labor. You must maintain shelter, which involves rent or property ownership. These costs never end as long as you exist. Cost of labor. You must work to generate the money necessary for survival. The average person in developed nations works approximately 90,000 hours over their lifetime, spending roughly one third of their waking adult life engaged in involuntary economic activity. This labor is not freely chosen. It is necessary for survival. Without it, you face homelessness, hunger, and death. Cost of suffering. Existence necessarily involves suffering: physical pain from illness, injury, and aging; psychological pain from rejection, loss, failure, and disappointment; existential suffering from awareness of mortality, meaninglessness, and the human condition itself. Your parents imposed all of this suffering on you when they decided to procreate. Cost of mortality. You will die. Your parents imposed mortality on you by giving you life. Death is not an abstract future event. It is a present reality that structures your entire existence. You know you will die, and this knowledge affects how you live. It creates anxiety, fear, and existential threat. Your parents imposed not just life, but also death, and both were imposed without consent. Cost of social subordination. You exist within social, economic, and political systems that you did not choose and cannot meaningfully escape. These systems regulate your behavior, extract resources from you, and subordinate you to various authorities. Your parents force you into these systems by creating you within them. As philosopher Rilke Weinberg notes, procreation exposes children to life's risks, which are numerous, unpredictable, and can result in grave harm. Your parents impose these risks on you, and you bear the cost. While you bear all these costs, your parents receive all benefits. Procreation is not primarily for the benefit of the child, it is for the benefit of the parents. Now, I do say in chapter 3 that the state ultimately benefits from it, but the initial imposition is for the benefit of parents. And then later, the child is supposed to contribute to society. We'll get to chapter 3 later. Many parents report that children give their lives meaning and purpose. This is a profound benefit. Your parents obtained this good through procreation. They created you to serve their need for meaning. You are the means through which they achieve purpose in their lives. Parents derive emotional satisfaction from children. They experience love, joy, pride, and fulfillment through their children's existence and achievements. You provide these benefits through your existence. In most societies, parenthood confers social status and validation. Parents are respected for having children. Childless adults often face social pressure, stigma, or questioning. Your existence provides your parents with social validation, legacy. Procreation allows parents to create a legacy that continues after their death. Children carry forward parents' genetic material, values, family name, and memory. You serve as the vehicle for their continuity, existential validation. By procreating, your parents fulfilled social expectations and avoided the social discomfort of remaining childless. Your existence relieved them of social pressure. All of these benefits are substantial goods that people value highly and actively seek. Your parents obtained these goods by creating you. You provided these goods through your existence, but you did not consent to provide them, and you are not remunerated for delivering them. A critical objection must be addressed. Even if procreation imposes harm, doesn't the fact that life, in most cases, is an overall benefit eliminate parental obligations to remunerate children for the harms they incur? This objection rests on flawed assumptions about moral relationships between harms and benefits. Philosopher Shiana Shefrin has demonstrated that harms and benefits are not symmetrical in moral significance. Consider her powerful hypothetical. Imagine a wealthy character, which she calls wealthy, who lives on an island and decides to bestow some of his wealth upon neighbors from an adjacent island who are already comfortably off. Due to restrictions, he cannot communicate with them or visit to obtain consent. He crafts 100 cubes of gold bullion, each worth $5 million, and flies over the island, dropping them nearby, near passerbys. Most people are delighted when this windfall falls at their feet. One person, who she calls unlucky, however, is hit by a falling cube, which breaks his arm. Unlucky admits that all things considered, he is better off for receiving the 5 million despite his injury. He is glad that this happened to him, although he regards it as reasonable that he would have hesitated if asked in advance whether he consented to being subjected to the risk of a broken arm and worse fates. Despite Unlucky's concession that he has been overall benefited, Unlucky's case is not morally disturbing in a way a rescue is not. This hypothetical reveals a critical distinction. It is impossible to break someone's arm to save them from drowning, which is preventing a greater harm. but it is morally problematic to break someone's arm to give them $5 million, conferring a pure benefit, even if they end up better off overall. Wealthy owes unlucky remuneration for the broken arm, regardless of the $5 million gift. Why? Because there is a fundamental moral asymmetry between inflicting harm to prevent a greater good and inflicting harm to bestow a pure benefit. Procreation belongs in a former category. Your parents did not create you to save you from some greater harm. You did not exist to be threatened by any harm. They made you to bestow what they perceive as the benefit of existence, but this benefit came packaged with serious, unchosen harms, mortality, suffering, forced labor, and moral burdens. As Sheffrin argues, harm involves conditions that generate a significant chasm or conflict between one's will and one's experience, or circumstances, conditions that render a person like that of an endurer as opposed to that of an active agent. Pain, disability, mortality, and forced labor all meet this definition. They are things you must simply endure, conditions imposed on you that conflict with your will and your capacity for autonomous agency. The three critical asymmetries undermine the overall benefit objection. First, preventing harm has moral significance than conferring pure benefits. We may break someone's arm to save their life, but it is morally problematic to break someone's arm to give them money, even if they end up better off. Second, failing to prevent harm to an existing person is morally significant than failing to confer a pure benefit. But in procreation, there is no existing person who will suffer if the person is not created. There is a perceived benefit that will not be conferred. By the way, that asymmetry argument that David Benatar articulated and better never to have been, this is the long version of that chart. He did cite Shefford in his book, but he didn't really lay it out fully the way that I'm laying it out here. So a lot of people dismiss the asymmetry because they don't actually know what it means. Go back and read Shefford, read the actual source that he cited. He also cited Parsons, by the way. I cite Parsons in chapter 10 of my book. I'll eventually get to that. Third, harms that must simply be endured has a special moral significance that is not erased merely because they come packaged with benefits. The person who suffers them deserves acknowledgement and, where possible, remedy. Your parents impose comprehensive harms, mortality, suffering, forced labor, not to save you from greater harm, but to confer what they perceive as the benefit of existence. Like wealthy, they may have conferred an overall benefit to those who actually enjoy life, but like wealthy, they remain accountable for the harms inflicted in the process of that conferral. The fact that these harms could not be separated from the benefit of existence does not eliminate parental responsibility. The parent-child relationship is fundamentally different from other relationships, including the relationship between individuals and the state or society at large. This distinction is crucial for understanding why parents bear unique moral debts that cannot be transferred to or assumed by other parties. Parents stand in a unique causal relationship with their children. They are the direct cause of their children's existence and of all the consequences that flow from it. This causal relationship creates special duties that non parents do not bear. The law has recognized that the child parent relationship generates unique obligations. Under common law, parents have positive duties to provide for their minor children's basic needs, duties that strangers and even the state do not bear in the same way. While the state may intervene when parents fail to meet these duties, the primary obligation rests with parents precisely because they brought the child into existence. The Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized the unique nature of parental obligations. In Prince versus Massachusetts, the court stated that parents owe children a primary duty of care to prepare children to fulfill obligations to the state. In Pierce versus Society of Sisters, the court held that the child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. This is basically a lead in for chapter 2, because um, what the Supreme Court is essentially saying is that the parent has a duty to prepare the child for their later responsibility or obligations to the state. So they're preparing you basically to be a life slave. They're supposed to raise you so that you would be a productive member of society. So this is the lead in for chapter 3. These cases acknowledge that parental authority over children carries corresponding responsibilities. Parents possess rights over their children that arise from the parent-child relationship, but the court explicitly characterizes these rights as coupled with the high duty to prepare children. This duty arises from the causal relationship. Parents created the child and therefore bear responsibility for preparing the child they created. But these cases recognize parental duties toward minor children. The MDLE, Moral Debt for Life Enslavement framework, extends this recognition to its logical conclusion. If parents have special responsibilities because they caused their children to exist and bear authority over them during childhood, these duties do not simply vanish when children reach adulthood. The costs parents impose, mortality, suffering, forced labor, moral burdens, last a child's entire lifetime. A duty to provide maintenance should similarly extend throughout the child's entire lifetime. Let me stop for a second to see if there's anybody here. Okay, great. Parental obligations arise from the act of procreation itself, which creates a moral duty owed by parents to their children for having brought them into existence under specific circumstances that encumber the child's future will. The parent created the child's needs by creating the child. The parent cannot simply transfer this more responsibility to others. What makes parental duties special is their voluntary nature. Parents chose to procreate or, having conceived, decided not to prevent the birth. This voluntary act of creation distinguishes parental obligations from obligations to the state or society might claim to impose. You did not choose to exist. You did not choose your parents. You did not choose the state you were born into or the economic system you must navigate. These circumstances were imposed on you without your consent, but your parents did choose. They chose to create you. This voluntary assumption of responsibility creates unique moral debts. When someone voluntarily creates harm or imposes costs on another, they bear special responsibilities for those consequences. The state did not make you. Society did not create you. Your parents created you. Therefore, your parents, not the state, not society, owe you remuneration for the existence they impose. Some might argue that if existence imposes costs, the state should bear those costs through social programs, universal basic income, or other collective mechanisms. This argument fails because it would allow parents to externalize the cost of their voluntary decision to procreate onto others who did not make that decision. If the state, funded by taxpayers, many of whom chose not to procreate, assumes the cost of existence, then parents receive all the benefits of having children while society bears the cost. This is unjust enrichment on a societal scale. Parents wanted children for their own benefit, meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, legacy. They should bear the cost of that choice and should not be permitted to externalize others. Moreover, state assumption of parental debts would eliminate the primary mechanism for discouraging procreation. Um, right. I want y'all to understand that the whole purpose of the moral debt for life enslavement is to discourage procreation, is to impose consequences so that because they're not going, these appeals to ethics to talk about how it is unethical, it falls on deaf ears. We just saw that with a recent live stream we did on Finding Gnosis' channel. We were talking to one of these life enslavers, and he basically didn't give a shit. He just said, "Okay, well, I had children. I wanted them. So what? I don't care that my children have to suffer. Tough shit. I wanted children. My wife wanted children. So it is what it is." No, this moral debt for life enslavement, the goal of it is to deter the incentives for procreating and to impose consequences. Now, if parents face no consequences for creating children, if society absorbs all the costs while parents retain all the benefits, then procreation continues unabated. The moral debt framework creates accountability by ensuring parents internalize the cost of their own decision to procreate. The parent child relationship thus generates obligations that exceed anything the state or society owes. Here is the moral debt for life enslavement. Forced heirship. Parents must pass at least 50% of their estates to their children with no power of disinheritance. This is partial restitution for the benefits parents receive from their children's existence and the costs imposed on those children. The state owes no such duty because the state did not choose to create you. The state owes a separate duty for forcing people to continue to exist. This separate um, duty is explained in chapter 3. Respect for complete autonomy. Parents must respect their children's absolute autonomy, including the right to opt out of existence humanely. And by humanely, for those who are going to try to gaslight me, I'm talking about medical assistance. I'm not talking about Toyota Corolling yourself. No, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about humanely, the same humane option that is given to cats and dogs. This duty arises because parents impose existence without consent. The state's obligation is merely to stop using violence to interfere with disposal rights, a negative duty to cease wrongdoing, not the positive duty parents bear. Forfeiture of exit rights. Parents who procreate forfeit their own right to opt out until they discharge their debts to their children. The consequences flow from the parents' voluntary decision to impose existence onto their children without their consent. The state bears no such forfeiture because the state did not create you. The special nature of the parent-child relationship means that parental obligations are primary and non-transferable. Parents cannot avoid responsibility by claiming that the state should provide for their children. Parents cannot discharge their debts by pointing to social programs or collective resources. They created their children voluntarily. They must bear the consequences of that creation. The moral debt for life enslavement rests on two interlocking moral principles: the doctrine of unjust enrichment and Kant's prohibition against using persons merely as means to one's end. Together, these principles establish why parents owe their children remuneration for the non consensual imposition of existence. Unjust enrichment is a foundational principle in law and moral philosophy. It holds that when one party receives a benefit at another party's expense under circumstances that make retention of that benefit unjust, the enriched party owes restitution to the party that provided the benefits. The doctrine has three elements. One party must be enriched, the enrichment must come at the other party's expense, and the circumstances make retention of that enrichment unjust. All three elements are present in procreation. Your parents are enriched through procreation. They receive meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, a sense of legacy, social validation, and a fulfillment of expectations. These are concrete goods that people value highly. Studies consistently show that parents report children as among the most important and meaningful parts of their lives. This value constitutes enrichment. But parenting is hard work, some might object. This objection misunderstands enrichment. Enrichment is not about whether someone received value. Excuse me. Enrichment is about whether someone received value, not whether something required effort. Moreover, the hard work of parenting is entirely self-serving. Parents hope to see a return on their investment in the form of meaning, emotional satisfaction, and a legacy. The fact that parents work to raise children does not eliminate the enrichment they receive. Parents who invest effort to obtain benefits are enriched by those benefits, even when obtaining them requires work. The second element, the enrichment is at the child's expense. The enrichment parents receive comes at your expense. You bear the costs that enable parents to receive benefits. You must exist, what requires you to maintain a body, engage in labor, suffer various harms, and ultimately die. Your parents receive meaning from your existence. You bear the cost of providing that existence. This is not a situation where both parties benefit and merely need to divide the gains fairly. This is a situation where one party receives all benefits while the other bears all costs. You provide value to your parents through your existence without having consented to do so, and without receiving remuneration for providing it. As Weinberg emphasizes, creating children exposes them to life's risk. When we expose other to risk when we expose other to risk, we are often obligated to minimize damages and compensate for harms. Life's risk lasts a lifetime, therefore, parental obligation to one's children does too. The circumstances make retention of benefits unjust for several reasons. Lack of consent. You never agreed to provide benefits to your parents. They obtained those benefits by forcing you into existence. In any other context, obtaining benefits from someone without their consent is considered unjust. You are not remunerated for the benefits you provide to your children. They receive meaning, purpose, and satisfaction from your existence while you bear all costs without receiving payment. Power asymmetry. You had no power in this arrangement. Your parents decided to create you, impose existence on you, and now benefit from that existence while you must deal with the consequences. You could not negotiate terms, refuse participation, or ensure adequate remuneration. Your parents could not have obtained meaning and purpose through other means that did not impose consent on non excuse me. They could have obtained meaning and purpose through other means that uh, do not impose costs on non-consenting parties. They could have pursued careers, creative projects, relationships, or spiritual practice that do not require forcing another person into existence. Therefore, all three elements of unjust enrichment are present. Your parents are enriched at your expense are the circumstances that make retention unjust. Under established principles of unjust enrichment, parents owe remuneration. Immanuel Kant's categorical imperatives requires treating persons as ends in themselves, not merely as ends to others' ends. This principle is foundational to moral philosophy and human rights. Persons have inherent dignity and worth. They are not tools to be used for others' purposes. Your parents violated this principle. They created you to serve their purposes. They wanted meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, and legacy. They used you as the means to achieve these ends. You are the instrument through which they obtain what they desire. Your parents did not create you for your benefit. You did not exist to have interests that could be benefited. They created you for their own benefit. The decision to procreate was made to satisfy their desires for children, meaning family, and fulfillment of social expectations. You exist to serve parental ends. But we love our children, parents protest. We wanted what was best for them. This protest misunderstands the problem. Love does not eliminate instrumentation. Slave owners sometimes claim to love their slaves. That did not eliminate the fact that slaves were used as means to others' ends. Furthermore, wanting what's best for someone you force into existence does not eliminate the fact that you move them into existence for your benefit. Kant himself recognized the special relationship of parental obligations arising from this instrumentation. He wrote that parents cannot destroy their child as if he were something they had made, since a being endowed with freedom cannot be a product of this kind, or as if he were their property, nor can they just abandon him to chance. Parents cannot treat children as mere products or property precisely because children are persons with inherent dignity, yet parents created them without consent to serve parental ends. Using persons as means to your ends is unjust when they do not consent to being so used. You never consented to being the means through which your parents obtain meaning, purpose, and satisfaction. They impose this role on you by creating you. The fact that you cannot get your prior consent does not make the instrumentation just. It makes procreation a unique case in which instrumentation is unavoidable, which is precisely why it is ethically problematic. These two moral frameworks, unjust enrichment and the ethics against instrumentation, converge to establish the moral debt for life enslavement. Your parents obtain benefits at your expense without your consent. They use you as a means to their end without your agreement. Both principles point to the same conclusion. Restitution is owed. The debt is not metaphorical. It is a fundamental obligation with specific terms and consequences. Parents enrich themselves through procreation. They found meaning. I'm sorry this is so repetitive, but I really have to drive this point home. They found meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, and sense of legacy, social validation, and the fulfillment of societal expectations. These benefits came at your expense in a form of non-consensual imposition of existence. All all the cost of existence it entails. Retention of these benefits without restitution is just. Therefore, parents owe a moral debt. The MDLE is fundamentally irreparable. No amount of money could ever adequately compensate someone for the comprehensive cost of existence, the mortality, suffering, forced labor, and loss of autonomy parents inflict through procreation. The debt can never be fully paid. This is why the framework demands restitution, not compensation. Compensation implies that adequate payment could restore the victim to the prior state or make them whole. But there is no prior state when existence itself was not consensually imposed. Restitution acknowledges the debt while recognizing its permanence. It is partial payment of an unpayable debt, not a transaction that receives equivalence or closure. It is crucial to understand that the basic care parents provide during childhood does not discharge this debt. Parents have duties to care for their children they created. These duties are the minimum required to keep the child alive and functional. Providing food, shelter, clothing, and basic care merely enables the child to bear the cost the parents impose. Parents are keeping alive the person they force into existence, so that person can continue bearing costs the parents impose. This is maintenance of a condition they created, not restitution for the comprehensive cost they impose. Kant recognizes that from procreation arises a duty to preserve and care for the offspring. That is, children as persons have by their procreation an original, innate, not acquired right to the care of their parents until they are able to look after themselves. But as Weinberg clarifies, when children in fact grow into autonomous adults, why should parents be obligated to care for adult children who can care for themselves? Her answer: because even if children can care for themselves, why must they? They didn't ask for any of this. The fact that you have become capable of bearing these costs does not negate the fact that these costs were imposed without your consent. The MDLE persists throughout the parent's and the child's life. It does not expire when the child reaches adulthood. It does not diminish over time. The debt exists because parents created a person without the person's consent, benefited from creating that person, and imposed comprehensive costs on that person. These facts do not change over time or in different circumstances. The unjust enrichment and instrumentation that parents commit through procreation create the MDLE. This debt can be discharged, but only by satisfying four specific requirements. Partial compliance is insufficient. All four requirements must be met. And this is figure 2.1. Let's see who's still here. Okay. Figure 2.1 illustrates how the MDLE arises from the unjust enrichment framework. Life enslavers receive continuous benefits from persons they create. These benefits are extracted without consent, and this extraction creates a moral debt to provide restitution. I don't know. Okay, y'all, again, I'm going to make this available for free tomorrow, so you can actually look at the chart more closely and examine it. I'm not even going to try to zoom in on it right now. Before detailing the specific requirements, a foundational point must be clarified. Parents who impose existence without consent have morally forfeited any right to testamentary freedom. The mandatory inheritance requirements detailed below do not represent a philosophical compromise between parental property rights and children's restitution claims. Instead, parents never acquire full moral ownership of wealth accumulated during their lives made possible only through imposing existence on non-consenting children. The inheritance requirements proposed here: 100% where no spouse survives, 50% minimum where a spouse survives represents a proper pragmatic starting point for implementation in legal systems that recognize near absolute testamentary freedom. They establish the fundamental principle that children's lives as creditors for life enslavement overrides parents' desire to benefit third parties. But make no mistake, the moral reality is that parents have forfeited testamentary freedom through the act of non-consensual life imposition. Why is this forfeiture justified? Consider the analogy to other forms of unjust enrichment and forced servitude. We do not recognize unfettered property rights to those who acquire wealth through the exploitation of non-consenting victims. A slaveholder cannot claim full ownership rights over property accumulated through slave labor. Similarly, parents cannot claim full ownership rights over wealth accumulated over a lifetime made possible only by forcing existence onto those who never consented to provide the benefits they gave their parents life meaning and purpose. The inheritance requirements exist not as limits on legitimate parental property rights, but as partial restitution for a debt parents morally owe. Any retention of disposal estates by parents is a privilege, not a right, a pragmatic accommodation rather than a moral entitlement. This is a separate, excuse me, 1 second. The forfeiture criterion establishes 4 distinct requirements that parents must satisfy to discharge the moral debt for life enslavement. All 4 requirements must be met. The life slave children have authority as creditors to determine whether the requirements have been satisfied, not the life enslavers who are the parents. Requirement 1, competent parenting. Parents must provide adequate care during childhood and prepare the life slave for independent adulthood. This is the baseline obligation, the minimum duty parents owe to keep the person they forced into existence alive. Unfortunately, when I convert the Word document to Kindle Create, the bullet points never align properly. So anyway, competent parenting includes providing adequate food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and education during childhood, creating a safe environment free from abuse and neglect, preparing the child for independent adult life through teaching life skills, financial literacy, and emotional regulation, supporting the child's development into a functioning autonomous adult. Can't emphasize that parents must educate the child to develop him both pragmatically and so that in the future he can look after himself and make his way in life, and morally, since otherwise the fault for having neglected him will fall on the parents. However, competent parenting alone does not discharge the MDLE. It is necessary but insufficient. The minimum parental duty merely prevents the child from dying as a result of the parent's decision to create them. Requirement 2, respect for autonomy. Parents must recognize the life slave as an independent agent as far as practicable under statism, with agency over their own existence. This requirement has 3 components. Recognition of independence. Parents must acknowledge their adult children not as extensions of parental will. They are not obligated to fulfill parental expectations and have complete agency to make their own life decisions regardless of parental approval. Acceptance of opt-out rights. Parents must accept their life slave's right to opt out of existence through medically assisted means. This acceptance must be genuine, not merely performative. Parents who claim to support the right to opt out while simultaneously attempting to prevent their children from exercising this right have not satisfied this requirement. No manipulation, guilt, or emotional blackmail. Parents must not use emotional manipulation, guilt, threats of withdrawal of support, or other coercive tactics to control adult children's autonomous decisions. The life slave choices must be respected without attempts at control. Parents who oppose career expectations, demand grandchildren, require adherence to religious or political beliefs, or otherwise attempt to control how their adult children live have not satisfied this requirement. Third, mandatory inheritance, forced heirship. Parents must guarantee that life slaves inherit their estates according to a 2-tiered structure that reflects the presence or absence of competing creditors with legitimate claims. This requirement recognizes that parents have morally forfeited testamentary freedom through non-consensual life imposition, while also acknowledging that surviving spouses may hold independent claims to marital property. Tier 1, no surviving spouse. Where the parent dies without a surviving spouse, children inherit the entire estate. This reflects the fundamental principle that life enslavers morally forfeit all testamentary freedom through their act of non-consensual life imposition. No third party, neither charities nor friends nor subsequent romantic partners nor distant relative have claims equivalent to those life slaves who bear comprehensive permanent burdens without consent. Any testamentary provision attempting to direct estate assets to third parties is void as an attempt to externalize a debt owed. Parents who force existence onto children may not posthumously shift the cost of that imposition on their life slaves while directing benefits to others who bore no burden. The 100% inheritance requirement, where no spouse survives, properly reflects the harm of imposed existence, mortality, suffering, forced labor, moral burdens, is permanent and comprehensive. These burdens last the child's entire lifetime. The restitution should similarly be comprehensive. It also treats life slaves as the true creditors they are. When a debtor dies owing money to a creditor, the creditor's claim takes priority over the creditor's desire to benefit third parties. Tier 2, with surviving spouse. When a parent dies with a surviving spouse, children must inherit at least 50% of the parent's entire, separate property and the parent's share of community property. The reduction from 100 to 50% in the presence of a surviving spouse recognizes that spouses hold independent legitimate claims to marital property that do not arise from consent violations. Spouses typically do not impose existence on children unless the spouse is also the child's parent. They do not make contributions to marital property accumulation through their own labor. They have their own vulnerability and need for support. They hold claims based on voluntary mutual commitments rather than a non-consensual imposition. However, the surviving spouse's claim does not entirely displace children's claims as creditors for life enslavement. Both are legitimate claimants, and 50% minimum ensures children receive substantial restitution while respecting the spouse's independent claims. The 50% minimum is not a philosophical statement that children are entitled to only half restitution when a spouse survives. Instead, it represents a practical accommodation of two competing legitimate claims. The underlying moral reality remains. Parents have forfeited testamentary freedom through procuration. Special case, a spouse is also the co-parent. Where the surviving spouse is also the biological parent of the child, that spouse faces their own moral debt for life enslavement obligations. The 50% minimum applies to each parent estate separately. Thus, each parent must ensure that children inherit at least 50% of the parent's estate. The second to die parent, having no surviving spouses, owes 100% of their estate to the children. Children therefore ultimately receive at least 75% of the total marital estate, 50 from the first parent and 100% from the second parent. The sequential structure is not double dipping. Each parent imposes existence independently. Even if both parents made a joint decision to procreate, each parent bears full responsibility for their participation in a non-consensual imposition. When two parents jointly cause individual harm, each is fully liable, not proportionally liable. The forced heirship right is absolute and non-dischargeable by parents. It cannot be reduced or eliminated based on estrangement or lack of relationship. Parental disapproval of the child's life choices, the child's financial success or lack of need, poor treatment of parents by the child, parental desire to benefit charity, friends, subsequent spouses, or other third parties, parental moral or religious objections to the child's identity, choices, or lifestyle, claims that other children are more deserving. Why are these grounds insufficient? The inheritance is restitution for the harm imposed, not a windfall. A creditor's right to repayment does not depend on the debtor's approval of the creditor's character. Parents cannot invoke their own wrongdoing, the original breach of imposing existence, as justification for avoiding this obligation. The obligation is not contingent on outcomes. That a life slave successfully manages the burdens of an imposed existence does not eliminate the imposition, and a life slave's right must not be contingent on a life enslaver's moral assessment, which would create the exact power dynamics that the MDLE framework seeks to remedy. Life enslavers wielding unilateral control over life slaves without paying restitution for the benefits they have received. This is restitution, not a gift. A mandatory inheritance is payment for a gift, not generosity. Life slaves are creditors. Life enslavers are debtors. A debtor cannot refuse payment because they dislike the creditor or because the creditor does not need the money. Instead, the debtor-creditor framework understands the moral situation. Creditors typically consent to the lending relationship. Life slaves never consented to being forced into existence. The obligation is closer to restitution for unjust enrichment or maintenance for involuntary servitude. Parents may not make testamentary dispositions to charities, distant relatives, subsequent spouses. I think I'm going to skip. While life enslavers cannot unilaterally reduce or eliminate the life slave's mandatory inheritance, life slaves retain absolute discretion to waive or discharge their claim. This is for those who actually have a good relationship with their parents. That their parents were not abusive and they actually enjoy their life and they don't feel that they were harmed by being brought into existence. So I have already accounted for this. Um, this asymmetry is fundamental to the MDLE framework. The distinction reflects the consent-based foundation. Life enslavers impose existence without consent and cannot avoid the resulting obligation through unilateral action. Life slaves do not choose to become creditors and may choose whether to collect the debt owed to them. This asymmetry is already well established in other legal contexts. Creditors may forgive debts, but debtors cannot unilaterally declare them forgiven. Life slaves may choose to waive their inheritance for various reasons: financial security, a desire to benefit a surviving parent or siblings, reconciliation with parents, moral or religious objections to accepting inheritance, or supporting charitable causes the life's uh, enslaver value. All such waivers must be explicit and in writing, made after the life enslaver's death or during estate planning, not extracted under threat of disinheritance. Informed, the life slave must understand the value being waived. Voluntary, it must be free from duress, undue influence, or manipulation. Importantly, the right to discharge is personal to each life slave. When one life slave waives the right to discharge, that waived amount increases the other life slave's share proportionally unless the waiving child explicitly directs otherwise. By default, waived amounts are redistributed among the remaining life slaves according to their respective interests while still being subject to the life slave's minimum protections. Life slaves may also make partial waivers. For example, waiving a claim to the family home, or so a surviving step parent may remain there, or accepting 30 instead of 50% to allow larger charitable bequests. Um, let's see if there's anybody. I may skip some of this because I don't. I did want you guys to actually read it, so I don't. I'm just trying to. Some people don't like to read, so I'm just trying to go over some of this stuff. I think I'm going to skip a lot of this. Um, I'm just explaining why this is just. Basically, what I say is the forfeiture criterion is that they don't have the right to opt out. They don't have the right to seek medical assistance in dying themselves until they have already discharged their obligations to their children. They have to disclose whether they have children, and the children have to actually consent to it or discharge the debt. Even if one child refuses to provide consent, then that basically blocks their entire right to opt out. It's automatic. It doesn't require any action. Um, you guys can go through this if you want to. The forfeiture criterion, that's basically explaining what I just talked about. Right. So this is the medical assistance in dying reform that I'm proposing. Applica- Applications for medically assisted death should include new screening requirements for applicants who have children, mandatory disclosure. Applicants must disclose whether they have any children. Failure to disclose is grounds for denial. For requirement verification, if the applicant has children, they must provide evidence of all four requirements that they have been satisfied. Applicants that cannot demonstrate satisfaction of all four requirements should be denied. Applicants may reply once they have discharged their obligations to their creditors. Children should be notified of their parents' made application and allowed to confirm or deny the requirements are satisfied. Children's assessments take precedence over parents' self-reports. This is more detail about it. I'm not going to go into that. I'm basically explaining how to actually make this happen. Your parents are not innocent parties in your enslavement. They are your primary enslavers. They committed their original breach by imposing existence without your consent. They benefited from this imposition through meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, legacy, social validation, and fulfillment of expectations. These benefits came at your expense. You bear all costs of existence without offsetting benefits that justify the imposition. The forfeiture criterion establishes specific obligations parents must fulfill. Parents automatically incur the MDLE when they impose existence. This debt can only be discharged by satisfying all four requirements: competent parenting, respect for autonomy, marriage, mandatory inheritance. Um, I guess I'll just read this last bit. Most parents will never acknowledge this debt. Most parents will insist they will insist that they love their children, wanted the best for them, and made sacrifices for them. These claims are irrelevant to the debt. Love does not justify imposing existence without consent. Good intentions do not eliminate unjust enrichment. Sacrifice does not discharge a debt that arose from the parent's decision to impose benefits at the children's expense. The parent-child relationship is the primary breach. Parents created your existence. Parents benefited from your existence. Parents owe you for imposing that existence. The debt is real, quantifiable, and enforceable through social pressure, institutional reform, and ultimately through organized resistance when legal channels fail. And this basically just sets up what chapter 3 is about, which I'm not going to talk about right now. But I don't know if any. Okay, somebody said that y'all wanted me to open it up for the discussion. I don't know. I can do that. Let me see. Okay, I thought I. Wait a minute. How do I'm can't. I'm not able to post it. I'm trying to post the link, and it's not allowing me to do that. Okay, let's try it again. Here we go. So I'm posting a link if anybody wants to discuss it. I'm not. I mean, if you have questions about it, this is not. I mean, there's a lot more detail in chapter 3 and chapter 10 explaining, and actually chapter 11 also explaining how this can actually be accomplished. So we're not there yet, but if anybody has questions about what we went over so far, I can answer your questions. Does anybody actually want to come up here? I mean, I'm going to wait a minute. I'm not going to try to rush you, but I just wanted to click the link. Okay. I'm not going to. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, and then if nobody clicks, I'm just going to end this live stream. Okay. Aside from anybody coming up here, does anybody have any comments or questions that you think I should clarify? All right. I just want to remind you all that it is going to be available for free tomorrow. I'm going to post the link in the description of this video, and I'm going to make another announcement tomorrow. So you only have one day to download it or accept it on Amazon. After that, it will be available on Kindle Unlimited, um, or you can get the paperback. Um, just I don't know, like, yeah, I did make it available for free already, but um Yeah, you just have limited time to get it. All right, I'm assuming nobody's going to actually click. So, all right, I think that was a full 2 minutes. So with that being said, I'm going to end this live stream. Y'all have a good evening, and I don't know when I'm going to review chapter 3, but I'll be doing that soon. I have other content that I really want to go over before I even get to chapter 3. So um, I'll be back soon.